Have you ever wondered what if death doesn't come like an explosion, but like a whisper? No pain, no screaming, just a sudden stillness, cold, quiet, and absolute. My name is Gavin Pierce. I was 17. I didn't even know I was about to die, but death already knew my name. There was no blinding red light, no dramatic soundtrack like in the movies, just an ordinary moment on a gray, rainy afternoon, a car veering off course, and three thoughts rising in my mind like periods that had already been written. The first was a voice not from outside me, but from somewhere deep within my mind. Light as breath, yet impossible to resist. You're going to die now. No panic, no pleading, just a simple, absolute statement, cold and clear, like a blade slicing through silence. I didn't even have time to feel fear. The second came like a wave of sorrow breaking loose from my soul. I wish I could have said goodbye. Not for myself, but for them, Dad, Mom, my little sister, and Dave, my best friend since 4th grade. I saw their faces. I couldn't hear a sound. Just their smiles were soft, as if they'd always known I'd be leaving. As if goodbye had already been said in some lifetime long before this one. And the last thought, the one that still leaves me silent to this day, was the third. Stranger, deeper than anything I'd ever known. But they will understand. Not in this life, but in the one beyond. Not while they're still here, but when they too step across the same threshold I'm crossing now. And the strange part? I believed it. Completely. With every part of me. I believed it like my soul had just been whispered the secret to the universe. That's when everything stopped. Everything. The clock. Sound. Gravity. I was no longer Gavin, sitting in the passenger seat of a Chevy Blazer. I was something else. Something you can't name. Something without shape. All I knew was I no longer belonged to the place I had just left. And the real story didn't begin until the moment I disappeared from my body. But the accident was just the surface. What happened after I left my body, encountered the light, and was shown 3 truths about the soul. That's what changed me forever. And if you've ever wondered what happens after we die, now's the time to listen. The car began to slide just as we turned off the highway, the tires losing grip on pavement slick like oil. And in that blurred moment between rain and rising mist, I knew it was all about to end. My friend, the one driving, must have felt it too. But no one screamed. There was no shouting. No sound of impact. Just a strange silence, like the world itself had suddenly held its breath. We were airborne. Not the kind of flying that feels free, but the kind where gravity gives up on you, and every law of physics turns into a fragile joke. I saw the guardrail bending like paper. The car twisted sideways like a kite that had lost its string. And then, everything went into slow motion. Not the cinematic kind of slow motion, but the kind where each raindrop floats in midair like living glass. Each heartbeat echoes like a drum from miles away, and my awareness is separated from my body before it ever hits the ground. I don't know when I left myself. I just knew I wasn't there anymore. I was above it all. No wings. Nobody. But there was a presence. I was watching my body, the shattered car, my friends still motionless, and the world I had just exited. There was no pain, no blood, just a soft mist covering everything. And then, something began to appear above me. Not exactly light, but a kind of light that could feel. It didn't come closer than the way you might expect. Instead, I was being gently pulled toward it. No resistance, no fear, no regret. In that state, I didn't think. I didn't speak. But I understood. I understood that I had left. I understood that I no longer belonged to the world below. And I understood, in a way that couldn't be explained in words, that I was not alone. There was someone or something there. No face. No voice. Just a presence more tender than any mother's embrace, deeper than any words of comfort ever spoken. A presence that made me realize I was home. But the strangest part wasn't the floating. It wasn't even the perfect peace. The strangest part was that I didn't want to go back. No part of me resisted leaving the world I came from. And that's when I began to hear the first truth. Not with ears, but with my soul. A truth so deep that if you're still alive, you may not be ready to know it. Because the light didn't just welcome me. It carried 3 truths about what happens after death, 3 doors into life we were never taught to open. And those truths changed everything about the way I would live from that moment on. I didn't step into the light. The light stepped into me. There was no threshold, no pathway, just an overwhelming sensation, like an invisible ocean rising from every direction, not drowning me in water, but in love. But not the kind of love we talk about here on Earth. Not love with conditions, expectations, or based on how well you lived or how badly you failed. This was something more ancient, more pure, a kind of love that made you realize you were never truly abandoned. You had just forgotten where you came from. I didn't see anyone in the light. No grandparents, no angels, no wings, no harps like in religious paintings. But I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by something I can only call knowing. Not knowledge, but knowing. There were no questions, no explanations, just presence. And in that presence, everything I had ever sought broke open in my awareness, as if the answers had always been there, waiting for me to remember. And then, as if someone had gently placed a hand on my shoulder, 3 truths began to flow through me. Not in any order, not in words, but like a stream of emotional data pouring straight into my consciousness, bypassing logic, bypassing thought. The first truth: you are not this body. It sounds cliché, but when you are no longer in a body, you know the body is just a garment. Something borrowed. Temporary. When I slipped out of mine, I didn't feel loss. I felt freedom. No pain. No weight. No boundaries. I was myself, without name, without age, without shape, but more real than I had ever been while alive. And I realized, all those years, I had mistaken the coat for the person wearing it, while my soul, the purest part of me, had been quietly standing behind it all along, just waiting for me to remember. The second truth: love is the only measure that remains when you die. There are no scores, no rankings. No one asks where you went to school, how much money you had, or how attractive you were. When everything else fades, only one thing stays: how much you loved. Not who you loved, but how, whether your love had conditions or not, whether you forgave or held on, whether you were able to carry someone else's pain as if it were your own. And I knew this not through reasoning, but through a deep, unshakable intuition. Every act of love, no matter how small, is recorded at the soul level. As if the entire universe is woven from love itself, and every time you love rightly, you add another thread to the great tapestry of life. The third truth: no one is ever truly lost, they just haven't remembered who they are. I used to think there were good people and bad people, broken souls and enlightened ones. But in that light, all those categories dissolved. No one is born to be cast aside. No one slips through the hands of God. There are only souls who've forgotten their origin. And that soul could be you. It could be me. It could be anyone who has ever looked in the mirror and quietly asked, "Who am I? What am I doing here?" The light doesn't condemn you for forgetting. It simply waits patiently for you to remember. I don't know how long I was there. There was no time, no movement, only presence, deep, still, like an eternity without a name. But then, like a breath being drawn back, the light began to withdraw. Gently, without force, but clearly. I didn't ask why. I just knew I wasn't done. I had to return. Not because I wanted to, but because my soul had agreed to something, somewhere, long before I was ever born. And then I fell. Not in the physical sense, but a spiritual descent from the peak to the pavement, from the light into shattered cement, from the infinite back into a broken body under a crushed car. But in the moment I opened my eyes through blood and broken glass, I knew. The world I had just seen was more real than anything I had ever known. And the hardest part was learning how to live after you've already died. I opened my eyes, not because I wanted to, but because something deep within me had to wake up. The light was gone. All that remained was the smell of burnt plastic, the taste of blood in my mouth, and the icy sensation of something wet sliding from my forehead down across my eyelids. I was hanging upside down by the seatbelt, my head dangling just above the crumpled steering wheel. Shattered glass was scattered across the seat, and a streak of liquid, maybe windshield fluid, maybe the tears of a dying machine, dripped slowly in front of me, like a sacred clock counting down to something I didn't yet understand. I didn't know if I was alive. I didn't know if I was dreaming. I didn't scream. I just breathed. Each breath was a question. Where am I? Who am I? Why am I still here? And most of all, why must I be here? Outside, the world was blurred like a fragmented dream. I was no longer Gavin Pierce, the 17-year-old kid coming home from his part-time job. I was a stranger, a soul expelled from heaven, forced back into a body like a student dragged into a classroom they'd already passed long ago. No one welcomed me back with open arms. Only the rescue crew. They shattered the rear window, reached in, and pulled me out as if lifting a body caught somewhere between life and death. They laid me on a stretcher. The emergency lights flashed into my eyes, and everything turned blinding, like that sacred light had been warped through the sirens of this world. My friend, who had been sitting next to me, was still alive. But when he asked, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but there wasn't a single word in a teenage vocabulary that could explain what I had just experienced. The doctors said I had no serious internal injuries, just a few cuts, some glass, maybe a mild concussion. But what no one knew was that part of me never came back. That night, I stood under the shower, letting the hot water stream over me, as if hoping it could wash away the truth I had brought back from the other side. But when my knees buckled onto the cold tile floor, when my tears merged with the water spiraling into the drain like a shattered hymn, I knew there was nothing in this world that could make me forget that place. No therapy, no advice, no prayer could ever express the feeling of having returned from a realm no one believes is real. And the cruel irony was, no one around me noticed that anything had changed. They thought I was quiet because I was in shock or afraid or shaken by the crash. But no one knew I had stood at the edge of eternity. And then, as if the universe hadn't finished with me, the next morning when I woke, a strange current began moving through my body, not electricity, not adrenaline, but something that felt like pure life injected into every cell. It made me alert. It made me tremble. And I understood everything was just beginning, because dying once might show you the light. But living after you've already died, that's the real test. And that surge of energy had just pulled me into a journey I was never prepared for. That morning, I woke up differently than I ever had before. It wasn't because of an alarm clock or sunlight slipping through the window, but because of a strange sensation, something flowing inside me, running through my heart, my spine, the tips of my fingers, even through strands of my hair. It was an energy that didn't belong to the physical world, couldn't be measured by any machine, yet it was so real it made me stand up without needing a reason. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a strength. It was life. But a kind of life I had never experienced before, life with awareness. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? How does a teenager who just survived a car crash explain that he's now feeling the energy of the universe? I tried to go back to school, to the routine, to normal life, but nothing fit anymore. My friends laughed about exams, new movies, and new crushes. I sat among them, smiled politely, but felt as though I was watching it all through glass. I knew they were alive, but I also knew I had died, and that truth had changed me forever. My body became strangely sensitive. When someone entered the room, I didn't just see them, I felt them. Sadness, anger, regret, and confusion all radiated from people like invisible waves of air. A person struggling with depression could leave me breathless. Someone full of joy could light me up as if I had been plugged in. I could no longer control my emotions because I was carrying everyone else's. And so I began to avoid parties, avoid crowds, avoid eye contact, avoid my reflection, because I wasn't sure anymore who that person even was. I left the city where I was born. No plan. No explanation. I just knew that if I stayed, I would lose my mind. I moved west, to a place where no one knew my name, where I could begin again without having to explain what had happened to me. But the truth is, I didn't begin again. I just drifted. I survived, but I wasn't living. Each day was a journey through feelings I couldn't name. I remember sitting up for hours in the middle of the night, my hands trembling because I could feel the loneliness of someone in the apartment below me, even though we had never met. I once slept in the woods, just because the silence there didn't shatter me the way human noise did. There were times I thought I was cursed. Times I thought I was losing my mind. But deep inside, there was a part of me that never left, a part that had once dissolved into the light, that had once heard the three silent truths, that had once remembered who my soul truly was. And it was that part that kept me alive for more than 10 years in quiet, in solitude, in the constant feeling that I no longer belonged to this world. Then one day, standing alone at the top of a mountain in Colorado, surrounded by snow and wind, I felt it. The presence. Not a voice. Not a vision. But the same feeling I had once known when the light embraced me, like a part of me had never really left that place, and now it was returning. But this time I wasn't pulled back. This time I was invited. To awaken. To remember. To finally begin living for the first time since I died. That mountain wasn't higher than the others around it, but it was the highest my soul had ever reached. No bells were ringing. No lightning splitting the sky. Just me, boots buried in snow, bare hands trembling from the cold, and a silence so deep I could hear the blood moving through my heart. I didn't pray. I didn't call out God's name. I just stood there, not expecting anything, not searching for anything, just a human being too tired to truly live and unable to truly die. And it was in that moment of surrender that the light returned. Not from the outside, but from within. There was no supernatural display, no clouds parting, no radiant glow, just a presence warm, clear, gentle enough to make me want to fall to my knees without even knowing why. It was exactly like the first time I encountered it, in that moment near death. But this time there was no trauma, no accident, no blood. This time I was being invited, and I knew, in a way I couldn't explain, that I was being offered a choice. Not in words, not in images, but in direct knowing. Are you ready now? Ready to live? Ready to stop running? Ready to take the light you once saw and turn it into something real, not just for yourself, but for those who've never seen it? I cried, not out of awe, but because for so many years, I believed I was being punished, sent back into the world like a child burdened with the wrong memories. But no, I had chosen to return. My soul had agreed, not to prove anything, but to serve something greater than myself. From that day on, I was no longer the same. Not because I started seeing auras or hearing angels whisper, but because I began to live with intention. I ate differently. I stopped drinking. I meditated. I learned how to turn inward instead of chasing answers out in the world. I started writing not to become famous, but to help my soul remember what it once knew. I spent time at nursing homes, sitting with people on the edge of life. I didn't talk about religion. I didn't talk about belief. I only spoke of the light, the kind of light that doesn't ask to be believed in, only to be felt. I realized that my purpose wasn't to teach. It wasn't to convince. It was to remind. To remind someone who is suffering that they are not alone. To remind someone who is struggling that their pain will pass. To remind someone in despair that death is not the end, but a doorway. And you don't have to pass through it to see the light. You only have to be still enough to remember. I began to forgive. Myself. Those who left me. A society that didn't know how to understand awakened souls. I forgave not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And as I forgave, I began to see everyone around me as part of myself. The stranger on the street, the quiet neighbor, the crying child in the store. All of them were trying to find their way back to the same place I once touched. And you know what's funny? After everything, I no longer long to return to that place. Because, for the first time, I carry it with me. In every breath, in every embrace, in every honest glance I share with a stranger. That light now lives through me. But there is one last thing. The thing I realized the latest. The thing that changed completely how I see the world, and the reason I share this story at all. And if you've ever wondered why we come to Earth in the first place, then listen closely to the final message the light left with me. Phần 7, lời nhắn cuối cùng từ ánh sáng it once there when I die, and it once there when I came back. It was in a quiet moment, sitting beside the bed of an old man taking his final breaths, that I finally understood what the light wanted me to carry with me. He couldn't speak anymore. His breathing was barely more than wind brushing over dry leaves. I didn't know who he was. We had never met. But his eyes, clear, alert, and deep, looked through me and said everything his mouth no longer could. I held his hand, and in that moment, I no longer saw a line between the living and the dying. I saw a soul like mine, like yours, like all of us preparing to go home. And then, like a wordless whisper rising from within me, I heard it again. This time, clearer than ever before. You're not here to survive. You're here to awaken. We didn't come to Earth to outrun death. We came here to learn how to truly live. To see through illusion, to peel away every layer society has wrapped around our soul's achievement, reputation, image, approval, and return to the only thing that remains when everything else disappears, love. Love is not a feeling. It is a choice. The choice to see the soul in another's eyes, even when they've hurt you. The choice to listen instead of react. The choice to forgive instead of judge. The choice to stay, even when you could walk away. And that kind of love doesn't need you to be perfect. It only needs you to be real, whole, fragile, honest. I'm not telling you this story so you'll believe me. Honestly, that doesn't matter. Because if you haven't died, then nothing I say will ever fully convince you. But if you've ever sat alone in the stillness of night and felt yourself drifting away from something you can't name, then you've already stood near the place I once went. And if you're tired, if you're wondering what it all means, if you're standing in the middle of a chaotic world and asking if the light is real, then I just want to tell you one thing. It is. And it's been waiting for you to remember that you never left it. Because death is not the door out. It is the reminder that we come from the light, that we are the light, and that every conscious breath can be a return. My name is Gavin Pierce. I died at 17. I saw what no words can ever fully describe. And I came back not to tell a story, but to remind you that you still have time. To wake up, to forgive, to love, and to start living like you never forgot who you are. Because the light doesn't need you to be perfect. It only needs you to come home.